Testing, testing.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, September 10th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to bring it into session, and the first thing we'd like to do is say the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Please stand.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. I'd like to have roll call, please.
Commissioner Neal?
Here.
Commissioner Kobler?
Here.
Commissioner Covarrubias? Here. Commissioner Davis?
Here.
Commissioner Connolly?
Here.
Commissioner Marlowe? Chairperson Christensen?
Present.
The record will reflect that Commissioner Marlowe's absent. He did notify us he wasn't going to make it tonight.
Thank you. Can we have staff introductions, please?
Marcy Reynoso and Ashley Peterson, Administrative Assistants.
Warren Frace, Community Development Director.
Katie Bannister, Associate Planner.
Aaron Nash.
And this is Andrew Falso from the City Attorney's Office.
That's everyone. Thank you. Okay, do we have any general public comments regarding matters that are not on the agenda tonight? If we do, please come to the podium, state your name, and please, by all means, address the Planning Commission.
Hello, Mr. Chair, Michael Rivera, P.O. Box 3134. You know, I'm sad. I've seen so many things from the dais in recent years that has been, let's just say, you know, we can all have disagreements and we can not be disagreeable. But the last planning commission meeting that I attended, I heard one of these board members, commission members, call the people of Paso Robles crybabies. Why? Because some don't like the direction of this city. I don't think that that's very nice. I certainly wouldn't have called my fellow Roblins crybabies. And believe me, I've been assaulted and demeaned and had all kinds of things done to me. But I just am quiet. I speak to the issues, and I don't go down the road of calling people crybabies or names because they happen to disagree with me. I think most you level-headed folks on this commission would agree with that. It's on tape, it's recorded, and I think there needs to be an apology to the people of this city. And I would also ask that, you know, when I decided to run for city council, I did it and I signed a civility agreement. And believe me, I will be civil. But I won't stand by and let my fellow Roblins be demeaned. And I would hope that you would stand with me and agree that that's not right. That we need to, as Roblins, want the best thing for this city and hash those things out. I would hope that you would listen if you didn't hear Mr. Cavarubis and his comments. It's taped. It's recorded. So I just hope as we move forward, whether I'm successful or not is really irrelevant in this circumstance. Let's all be courteous to one another. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, good. Hi, Linda George, 3126 Spring Street. I'm a candidate for District 1. And hopefully the mobile home ordinances are on the agenda tonight, right? Okay, no. And then the home occupations are off the agenda also? Great. So the reason why I'm speaking up is that in 2020, AB 5 law was passed and it outlawed 1 million independent contractor jobs in California. Since then, the PRO Act has been established. The Department of Labor has created a 6-factor rule that is, we came in March 2024 and has outlawed 74 million independent contractor jobs in this country. I have been fighting that since 2020 with Rep. Congressman Kiley and other state officials. And I'm here tonight mostly to speak about that. The home occupation, the 8 list of jobs that are on there, there needs to be some real details as to why they're on there. I think that is I think I might have said this before on the phone. I don't think it's a staff or anybody's right to tell somebody how to make their money if it's within legal bounds. So I urge that, well, I've already spoken with council, and we're going to look at those very closely, okay, because wine taster, in home occupations is very popular in Napa and other wine areas. Secondly, mobile home. The ordinances for the mobile homes was suggested to remove those. I actually represent GSMOL.org. I'm a legislative contact, and we've helped pass 6 laws in the last couple years. I sent those ordinance changes to GSMOL.org, President Ann Anderson, and I also sent them to Fred Strong, councilman who used to represent WMA. Warren has been really good at explaining. The staff is really good at explaining. There is a lot of questions about those ordinances. I'm not sure if you guys know that there's an MRLPP and a statewide HCD does the mobile home residency protection program that we fought for last year and state kept. So I am concerned that you guys voted to remove the ordinances out of 7. It doesn't matter where they are, but it matters what they say. And the way that they're written out are not consistent with the 3 parks that are in Paso Robles, and they're not consistent with state law. So I urged all of you guys with this wonderful ability to overhaul the ordinances that you must go slower, because those mobile home, we got to look at them. Ann Anderson is the president of GSMOL. She offered to have Bruce Stanton, our attorney, to look over them. We had a legislative contact phone call on Saturday. The lobbyist is concerned that they're not equal to residential, so that you guys can charge fees. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Janice Saywalt, and I'm here to represent myself, or Pet Nanny Paso. Basically, it's a home occupation business that I run that I've had for about 3 to 4 years. I'm not sure why they're prohibiting it now. No response, no nothing, I guess. This is my 2nd time here. The first 2 times were with the city council, and I didn't know whether or not I would get any type of response or from anybody as to why this has come about. Is there an issue with pet sitting with overnight? Guess not.
Did you say what your home business was? I apologize. I've been listening.
Pet sitting?
Pet City?
Pet sitting, yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's, I was told that it's being prohibited by the Planning Commission, so are you not aware of that?
Are you asking me specifically?
Yeah.
Well, this is your time to give your comments.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll try and follow up with you to give you the answers.
I wasn't sure how this works.
No, that's okay. This is all these are your minutes.
Okay, so that's basically, I just want you to be aware that I'm concerned, and I run a very professional business. I have great reviews, so I'm not sure why, it's being prohibited. So that's my concern. Okay? Thank you very much for all your time.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Carr, Paso Robles. Yes, I'm also been concerned about why those were prohibited, and I've asked a number of times, going back 6 months ago, and never got a response. And now I'm a little bothered, especially because the Planning Commission or in the Planning Department had ample opportunity to address these needs, these concerns. Instead, they passed this document down to the City Council. I don't know what was going on there. You just kind of kicking the bucket down the road, or you didn't understand what was going on, but you just passed this conflict down to the City Council. So you have this 430-page document now with a big conflict tag to it, which could have been resolved, could have been fixed, could have been talked about. We're reasonable people. We ask questions. We expect an answer back. We can talk about these things. But when a wall just comes up and we don't get any responses, that's going to rile some people. So thank you very much.
Is there anybody online, Marcy?
No, not for this item.
Okay, seeing no more comment, we'll close comment. There were a couple questions, I think, in that. I'm not sure if the city staff has any answers right now, but if you would like to address.
Yeah, we've been tracking a number of these issues. So I think one of the commenters had questions about the mobile home ordinance, the recommendation to remove it from Title VII and consolidate all the mobile home regs under the zoning code, which is Title 21. So Ms. George has submitted, her concerns in writing. Those have been forwarded to the city attorney for review. We are currently working on the city council report for next week's agenda. and we'll have a thorough discussion of the mobile home issue in the council report. And then the other issues were about the home occupations and the pet sitting prohibition, which is one of the restricted home occ uses that came out of the Planning Commission recommendation. Staff has reviewed the pet sitting prohibition, and we are going to be forwarding a recommendation to council to make that an allowable use, prohibit dog kennels, but allow pet sitting. So we expect that will probably be in the agenda that's issued Friday. There's a number of other prohibited home occupations that staff isn't recommending we change, but we will include a formal discussion about why those are inappropriate in single-family residential zones.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. So we're going to move on tonight to the first item on the public hearings, which is the rezoning and development plan. Staff have a report on this presentation.
Thank you, Chairperson Christensen. So yes, we have one item, one public hearing this evening, and it is for a mixed-use project proposed at 1745 Spring Street. The project does include entitlements for rezoning, for a development plan, and for a conditional use permit. So looking at location, this is at the southwest corner of 18th and Spring Street. To the north is the Paso Market Walk. To the west, you've got the Christian Life Center and a residential neighborhood. And to the south, the Kuhl Nicolay Funeral Home. And then there's commercial uses on the opposite side of Spring Street along that corridor.
Pardon me one second, Katie. Is that able to be put on our screens here? It's just it's not showing up. Well, they can work on it. If you want to continue, Katie, I'm sure Marcy can work on it.
We're not sure why your screen's not working.
Okay, we'll work around it. Thank you.
Okay. Looks like Karen might have a solution. So as I said, this is at the southwest corner of Spring and 18th Street, looking at some images of the adjacent neighborhood. Like I said, to the south is the Kuhl Nicolay Funeral Parlor. To the north is the Paso Market Walk. To the northeast, mostly a commercial, but mixed in. There's also some residential uses in that block, and then largely commercial across the street, commercial center, and then some offices. So this is in the T3F zoning district. The intent of the T3F zone is to preserve the existing character of the neighborhood, but allowing additional density and more diverse uses than would be allowed in the T3N, which is the residential zone to the west of the site. There is about a half an acre of land that would be developed as a part of this project. The site was previously used as a gas station. It was it was developed as a gas station in the 1960s. The underground storage tanks for gas have been remediated on the site. There are some existing requirements that the applicant will have to comply with regarding the Regional Water Quality Control Board's environmental standards that they'll have to comply with as a part of the project. As I mentioned at the beginning, the project does include rezoning the property to apply an overlay district, the Resort Lodging Overlay District. This is an existing overlay district that exists in different areas around the city, and it would be applied here on the property. The project includes a development plan for the structure and the different uses that'll go into that building, and it will include an affordable housing density bonus that comes along with some concessions that are required by state law. In addition, the applicant is proposing a wine tasting room. Wine tasting rooms are a conditionally allowed use in the T3F zone on Spring Street, and so the Planning Commission has a conditional use permit to consider as well. Overarching all of these entitlements is a mitigated negative declaration. Because of those formerly leaking underground tanks on the site, the project is not exempt from CEQA, and so a mitigated negative declaration was circulated for the project. Ultimately, the City Council will need to make the decision on this project because of the rezoning, and so this evening the Planning Commission will be making a recommendation to the City Council. The Resort Lodging Overlay District, this is a lot of words on the page, but it's just some highlights. The district is intended to allow the city to consider and selectively provide appropriate locations for hotels and other visitor-serving lodging and the accessory uses that go along with that. And so it's a way for the city to not necessarily allow hotels all throughout any particular zone, but to allow just specific sites that make sense for hotels to be applied. The economic development strategy of the city has a goal of developing Paso Robles as an end destination tourist attraction, and so that's part of the intent of the Resort Lodging Overlay District. And then at the bottom paragraph, the Planning Commission and ultimately City Council, when deciding whether or not to apply the Resort Lodging Overlay, can look at things like the adequacy of streets and highways to handle any anticipated traffic and the compatibility of the development with the adjacent and nearby land uses. So the next entitlement that the applicant is requesting is the development plan. This is a mixed-use project. On the ground floor, there'll be several commercial spaces totaling about 3,400 square feet. There would be 16 hotel rooms on the 3 floors of the building, 8 residential apartments, including one that would be deed restricted for a very low-income household. There is an enclosed courtyard and a rooftop patio included. So here's some looks at the architecture. We're looking at northeast. We're on Spring Street, looking northeast towards the project. You can see the elevator shaft on the top that is taller than what is typically allowed. So we'll see that there's a height exception requested, and that's largely for the elevator up there on the top of the building. But some nice storefront windows facing Spring Street and nicely designed building. Moving further north on Spring and looking back towards the building to the southwest, this is what you'd see from the corner of 18th and Spring Street. Continuing to move around the building, now we're on 18th Street looking, the alley is there on our right, so there's some covered parking for some of the parking there and some units above, and then there's some additional parking in a parking lot further down the alley. And then within the alley, you see that parking lot that I just mentioned. So there's the parking, and then you can see the building there in the background. Looking at the site plan, the red outline is largely the footprint of the building. There are, in blue now, are the 2 tenant spaces, the commercial tenant spaces that are proposed that would face Spring Street. There are 2 hotel units behind the commercial space that are there on the ground floor. And then there's an enclosed courtyard behind the, thank you. There is an enclosed courtyard behind those hotel units in the ground floor. So now moving into the second and third floors, there are a mixture of hotel and residential units. So on the second floor, these are all hotel units. They're in that orangish color. And then in yellow, you see that there would be residential units. I believe it's 7 residential units and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hotel units on the second floor. The rest of the hotel units would be on the third floor. They're largely facing Spring Street and some facing the courtyard. And then there is 1 residential unit also on the third floor. There is additionally a rooftop patio that is served by the elevator that comes up there in the red square, and then in green is that rooftop patio. So this is a table that I pulled from the staff report, just lists all the different development standards that the project needs to comply with. The project does comply with all of its development standards, excepting height, as I mentioned previously, and then it also does not meet its standard for parking. We'll go through, the applicant is providing an affordable unit, and so does have the ability to request concessions from the city, and so we'll get further discussion on those 2 items about the height and the parking. So jumping into parking, so in the T3F zoning district, there aren't hotel parking standards that are written into the T3F zone because we don't typically allow hotels in that zone. The more reasonable parking standard to use is the hotel standard for the most similar zoning district, which is the TC2. So the standards we see here in the table are from the TC2 hotel standards. So a hotel has to provide one parking space per guest room and then one parking space for each member of staff on the largest shift. So there's 16 hotel rooms, and the applicant reports that the largest number of staff that will be present is 2, so 18 total for the hotel. The applicant has to provide parking for any accessory uses that are open to the public. None of the hotel accessory uses will be open to the public, and there are conditions that will require those to be limited to just hotel guests and residents that live on the site. So no parking requirement for those accessory uses. Non-residential, I was misreading it and confusing myself. So the non-residential uses are going to be those 2 tenant spaces on the ground floor. Those have to provide 1 parking space for every 400 square feet, which is 8 parking spaces. And then any outdoor seating areas that are associated with restaurants or other nightclub uses also have to be parked. As I stated, those uses will not be available to anyone other than the hotel guests and the people who live on the site, so they don't need to be to provide any parking spaces. Residential uses, you are required to provide 1 per 1-bedroom unit. However, in mixed-use developments, you can count 66% of the parking that is required for the non-residential uses to be double counted towards residential. So there are no parking spaces required for the residential uses on this site. So that comes to a grand total of 26 parking spaces required. 21 parking spaces are proposed, which does leave the project with a deficit of 5. So I'm jumping into the elevations. So the second concession that is requested by the applicant is a height exception. So the bulk of the building is 36 feet in height. 36 feet is what is allowed. It is just a few inches taller than that, but it comes very close to meeting the height requirement. The screening on the roof that covers any rooftop mounted equipment is 39.5 feet, so it's a bit over height. And then the tallest part of the building is the elevator shaft, which is 48 feet tall. The maximum height allowed in the T3F zone is 36 feet. And so, as I stated, the applicant is requesting a concession regarding height to allow the taller building. Our fire department has reviewed this building, and they do have apparatus that is capable of fighting a fire if the need should arise here. And so it is not a life safety concern to allow the additional height here. Moving on to the 18th Street elevation, where you see the larger part of the building there on the left and the courtyard in the middle, and then the parking with some residential units above there on the right. This is the view from the alley. I think I have that. Nope, this is the south elevation. I apologize, I misspoke. So this is from the south looking north. This is what you would see from the parking lot of the funeral home next door. And then here's the alley elevation. So you can see some of the parking is covered, and then there's the parking area off to the right. Colors and materials, there is metal roofing proposed on the roof, and then a series of different trim colors. You've got some white oak finish on some of the detailing, and then largely a stucco building. So jumping into density and affordability, so as I've stated a number of times, the project does include 1 affordable unit, and so that does allow the applicant to request and requires the city to allow certain density bonuses and concessions. So in the T3F, you can build as many as 12 residential units per acre, which would allow 6 residential units on this site. The applicant is proposing 1 very low income unit, which is 17% of the total units, which then entitles them to a 50% density bonus and up to 3 concessions. The applicant is proposing 8 residential units. That's a 33% density bonus and 2 concessions. So that would be the height that we discussed, and then the 5 parking spaces would also be a requested concession. So this comes from state law, so the city council ultimately will need to make the decision, but the city council, the state law says that the city shall grant the concession or incentive, and concessions are things like alterations to development standards or reduced requirements on the project, essentially. So the city shall grant the concessions or incentives unless the city makes a written finding based upon substantial evidence of any of the following, and that would include that the concession does not result in identifiable and actual cost reductions, that the concession has specific adverse impacts upon public health and safety, or that it would be contrary to state or federal law. Staff does not have written findings that would support any of those requirements. So if in approving the development plan, the requirement would be to approve these concessions. As I said, the project is including a wine tasting room. Wine tasting is conditionally allowed in the T3F just on Spring Street. And so the intent of a conditional use permit is to make sure that the use is compatible with its surrounding uses. Obviously, we've got some sensitive uses nearby, the funeral home to the south and the church to the west. We do have the Paso Market Walk, which includes wine tasting uses and similar uses and seems to be relatively compatible with its neighborhood, but there are some other sensitive uses. There are conditions that require or that would preclude any outdoor amplified music and any food or wine service up on the rooftop bar. And certainly if the Planning Commission feels that there are additional conditions needed to make this project compatible with its neighborhood, you can add those to the resolution. So there are a lot of proposed mitigation measures and conditions on the project. These are just some highlights, and they are shortened, so there is definitely more expansive language in the actual resolution. Both 5 and 6 are regarding the affordable unit. They require the applicant to enter into to record a deed restriction limiting the use of one of the units for 55 years for affordable housing. And number 6 is going into an agreement with the city to provide that housing for that term. Any future signage would have to go back to the DRC for review. There are some architectural requirements, 14, 15, and 16, that the window glass be inset at least 2 inches in order to provide the more interesting architecture. And the perspectives we saw definitely indicate some three-dimensionality, and so this is just to ensure that the final product we see that inset. In addition, the storefront windows would need to be clear and smooth glass, and that comes from the architectural guidelines of the Uptown Town Center specific plan. We want to provide pedestrian interest for folks walking down the street, and so they can look in and see all the interesting things going on in the business there. The number 16 would require would not allow any horizontally sliding windows, and there's none shown in the elevations. Number 17, I've mentioned before that only hotel guests and long-term tenants of the project can use the outdoor courtyard and the rooftop patio. Conditions number 18 and 19 were written so that no food service or bar or alcohol service can occur on the rooftop patio. I neglected to include that outdoor courtyard, so if the Planning Commission wanted to include that ground floor courtyard, they could potentially add it there as well to 18 and 19. These are largely engineering conditions. The applicant will be required to replace the pavement on 18th Street, about half the width of the street. It is not in good condition. They would need to provide angled parking on 18th Street. Currently, it's parallel parking, and so this would provide some additional parking on the street. There are some improvements, frontage improvements, largely curb, gutter, and sidewalk on both Spring and 18th Street. The applicant will have to construct the alley. It is not built to standard. If the water demand requires, they'll have to upsize the water main, and they will have to replace a clay sewer pipe that runs in the alley. These are mitigation measures that are included in the mitigated negative declaration for the project. There's a requirement to shield lights. There's some requirements to provide a facility to see some energy efficiencies in the future. As I mentioned, there were formerly hazardous materials on this site, and so they will have to submit a soils management plan to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. I mentioned previously that the N is for noise, so the noise mitigation measures at the outdoor courtyard and rooftop patio will only be open to tenants of the residential units and the hotel, and any amplified music would have to be supported by a noise study that documents that it could not be, that it would comply with the noise ordinance. And then there are some transportation-related mitigation measures that come from the transportation study for the project. The applicant will have to construct a bulb out at the corner, similar to what the Market Walk has on the north side of 18th Street. There is some parking adjacent to the alley that blocks the line of sight for folks using the alley, so they'll need to remove some of those for safety. There's some school warning signs that need to be replaced, and then some new pedestrian warning signs that will need to be installed. As always, the Planning Commission has options. The first is to adopt the resolutions and recommend the City Council approve the project as it is proposed. Second would be to make amendments to the draft resolutions and still recommend and adopt the resolutions to recommend the project to the City Council. If you don't feel you have enough information, you could refer the project back to the DRC or to staff, or you could deny the project by adopting findings of denial. Staff is recommending approval of the project. There are 3 resolutions needed in order to do so. The first would be, resolution would recommend adoption of the mitigated negative declaration that's included in the staff report. The second would be to recommend approval of an ordinance that would rezone the property to allow the resort lodging overlay district. And finally, the third resolution is for the development plan and the conditional use permit. So the development plan would include the concessions for the affordable housing density bonus, and the conditional use permit would be for the wine tasting room. And that concludes staff's report. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Katie, very much. That's a great report. So we'll take it back to commissioners for questions of staff. Do we want to start? Commissioner Conley.
Yeah, I have some questions. Thank you, Chair. With regard to the hotels being prohibited at this location, I know there are other hotels on Spring Street. So where does this zoning that prohibits hotels begin and the ones that allow it start? And is this going to be the only location? Like, you don't want a checkerboard type of zoning. So I was wondering how this would affect adjacent properties.
So the rezoning is only going to be applied to this one property. Others could certainly make the request to have their properties rezoned, but the question ahead of you is just for this property. The existing zonings in the downtown, the TC1 and the TC2 zoning districts allow hotels. That's largely downtown and south of downtown. A lot of the hotels that occur in the north part of the city actually are in the T3F and the T4F, where they have become non-conforming uses. So anyways, hotels generally in the true downtown core and south of that is where they're allowed.
Yeah, so I know like south of 13th, there's hotels like Farmhouse and other hotels, motels. So I was just wondering what the thinking is. Is there a plan as to where hotels would be and where they wouldn't? And not that necessarily matters, but I didn't know if that was a consideration for this.
It certainly is something staff has been thinking about. It does, I mean, obviously there's a large demand for hotels in our community, and we do get requests. Warren, feel free to jump in at any time. Currently, the zoning allows hotels in the downtown and kind of south of that. But I think rethinking Spring Street and how and where hotels are appropriate is definitely something that is a good effort.
Also, I'm a little confused. I'd like to ask a question with regard to the applicant requesting a 33% bonus density, and then having also the 50% density bonus. How do those relate? Are they eligible for 50% and only asking for 33, or are they getting 83% by adding them? I don't understand the density bonus difference there that you're talking about.
Sure. Yeah, the state law says that for when you de-restrict 17% of your units, which is what the applicant is proposing, you can request up to a 50% density bonus. The applicant is only requesting 33%.
Okay, great. And my understanding is there's 16 hotel rooms and 8 residential units. Out of those 8, are 2 of them for tenants? do the 8 for residential units include the tenant units that you were speaking of?
Yes, those would be the same. Yes,
Okay.
the residential units are where you would have long-term tenants.
Okay, and one of those would be for low income?
That is
Would it be
correct.
strictly for the tenants, for tenant use, or would it be one of the 8? It wouldn't necessarily be one of the 2 tenant units that would get the low income credit?
So there will be one of the 8 residential units will be deed restricted for a very low income household. So there's 8 apartments, and one of those will be only a low income qualifying household will be able to rent and use that apartment.
And that's not necessarily one of the tenants. It was any one of those 8.
You're not one of the tenants, you said?
You said there's 2 tenant units, so I assume the 2 tenant units are part of the same 8, or are they separate?
It sounds like I misspoke. I don't know what 2 tenant units are. There are 8 apartments for residential use. I apologize.
The bottom floor, you mentioned there were a tenant unit or 2.
Okay, I misspoke. So on the ground floor, so those are commercial tenants.
Okay, so they're not related to the...
Right. In the site plan, I was using different colors, and it's going to take me forever to get there.
It's kind of confusing when you talk
Yes.
about units, whether they're dwelling units or residential units or tenant units.
I apologize. Yes, on the ground floor, there are 2 commercial tenant spaces. So those large blue rectangles, those are for commercial users. I believe the applicant intends to use
I
the
see.
southern
So
space.
there'd be commercial use. Okay.
Commercial uses.
I understand that. I thought they were lodging units. Okay.
I apologize.
Okay. And so let me ask, where you do have other resort lodging uses, do you have another example where we've done this type of thing, where we rezoned a parcel or parcels because they were requesting it? And
Yes, so it's a little hard to read because it's scaled out for the whole city, but there is a map at the end of the second resolution, and it'll probably take me a bit. I can get you the page number. So it is page 273 of 330 in your agenda packet. And the orange areas are existing areas where the resort lodging overlay already has been placed. So they are largely north of Highway 46 East. And then there is also an area, the hotel at First and Vine is another area.
okay. I was asking because I wanted to know if there was other examples, that this isn't the first time we're doing this.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
the overlay's been around for many years.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Do any other commissioners have questions for staff? Commissioner Neal, sorry.
So I was just wondering, the property just to the north, the Market Walk, doesn't it have very similar uses as this? Doesn't it have short-term rental, which on the upper floors, as well as retail on the first?
That is correct.
But it didn't get the resort overlay?
They did not, at the time, we did not have short-term rental rules in place, and so the intent, as I understand it, I was not with the city, so if I misspeak, Warren, please correct me, there were not short-term rental standards in place at the time, and we had short-term rental permits available. We are now fully subscribed for short-term rental permits, so that would not be an option on this site.
So the Market Walk second-story units are apartments. But as apartments, at the time, we didn't have restrictions on turning apartments into short-term rentals, so it was allowed as short-term rentals. That's how they become lodging, but the actual underlying use is multifamily residential, not hotel.
But the effective use is?
Short-term rentals are lodging units.
Commissioner Covarrubias?
Thank you. So just for clarity, if you go to your page 17 real fast, with regards to parking. Yeah, you're good.
I was looking in the staff report.
So just a question so we're dealing with a 5-unit deficit on the parking side.
That's
You
correct.
mentioned that the striping on 18th Street is going to be changed. Are any of those new stripings accounted for in any of this equation?
No, the applicant does not get credit for the on-street parking, but obviously it will increase the number of spaces available to.
Do you know how many it will increase by?
Joe Chenard, who's one of our acting city engineers, is with us and can address that.
Okay.
Good evening, Joe Chenard. I'm a consultant for community development. Right now, there would be about 6 spaces available if they were parked parallel across that frontage. By going to diagonal parking, it'll go to 9. So,
Okay. 9 all on one side?
That's correct.
On the south side?
That's correct.
Okay.
Right. It's parallel parking on the side toward the market walk, and there are 6 spots on that side.
Okay, great. Thank you. So another question, not to you, sir. The designation for the parking with regards to the project itself, understanding there's mixed use of hotel and residential, the parkings that are allocated, are they specifically allocated to either residential units or hotel parking?
The intent when you give a reduction for mixed use is that the spots not be designated, that they be shared. Residents tend to be on site at night and commercial uses tend to need the parking in the day. And so the idea is that there's some overlap. How the applicant ultimately manages their project is not, I don't have any conditions provided for you at this time. Certainly conditions can be added, but there's nothing that we haven't been given a management plan. Staff's hope would be that those spots would all be shared so that all users could use the parking on the site.
And I apologize if I missed it. So the employees that will be working, that parking is going to be designated also as part of this number of equations?
The employee parking is included as a requirement of the number of spaces they have to provide. Whether or not they'll be designated with a placard, a physical placard that requires spots to be intended for each person is not laid out in anything in your staff report.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, and we've talked about this many times in different projects, is how much of this is going to flow onto the streets, right? So you've got hotel use, you've got residential use. Common sense says that in most residential situations, you've got more than one vehicle. Not always, but it's not uncommon to have multiple vehicles. So how much of this is going to spill into Spring Street, 18th Street, and the surrounding areas? So that's kind of where my question is lying. The affordable housing unit that it's being designated, is it going to be specific to a specific unit already designated?
Yes, the agreement, when we got into the conditions of approval, I think the second condition I specified was that the applicant would go into an agreement with the city, and it would designate one specific unit for a low.
Okay, so that will be predetermined upon construction, development.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Kogler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few questions. Katie, in the staff report, it states that the desired building form in the, if I'm paraphrasing it, the T3F zone is small detached residential and or small attached retail. Now, I realize small is a definition, maybe in the eye of the beholder, but perhaps this building either is or isn't small, depending on your connotation there. But if the overlay goes on, the resort overlay goes on, does the thrust of that desired building change? Is there a standard for a hotel of this size in terms of architecture or form? Or does the fact that in the T3F zone, which is still the underlying zone if there's an overlay, that the intent is really the building form that I just stated?
So the hotel resort overlay does not include many development standards. I don't think it has any, to tell you the truth. So we would be relying on the T3F zoning district standards. So actually associated with the Paso Market Walk next door, a flex shed, the Uptown Town Center specific plan was amended to allow the flex shed building type to be used in the T3F when on Spring Street. So that is currently allowed in the T3F. Okay. This project notwithstanding, it's allowed in the T3F if you're on Spring Street.
Okay. My next question is actually relative to the slide that's on the screen. It deals with shared parking. As the states, 66% commercial spaces may be used to meet residential parking. That works really well if it's an office, particularly because the offset times, peak times, it works maybe a little less with retail. But I don't understand how that really functionally works with a hotel, but it seems like everybody needs to be there at night. The people live there, the people that are staying in the rooms, and it seems like peak demand for parking would be at night. And I understand that this allows shared, but does shared really work in that context?
You know, it's a good question. I think management of parking is definitely going to be a part of you know, the applicant's long-term management of the project of the site. Yeah, you know, I think you're right. Typically, mixed-use projects, you've got those diurnal fluxes where the, you know, different uses need different parking. They have different parking demands at different times of day. And, you know, the code does still allow for that mixed use shared parking for commercial uses. It doesn't specify hotels versus, you know, your office or a, you know, a retail type use. But it's, you know, I think it's a good question.
Okay. Are there open space requirements for the residential units that are a part of this? And does this meet those with that courtyard, or did you look at that?
We did. So there is an exception for residential units that are within, and I apologize for not having it at the ready. I believe it's a half-mile walking distance of a city park, and these are close enough to the downtown city park that they have no on-site open space requirement.
Okay. And then speculate a little bit with me, if you will. If the hotel was not either a part of this or was not approved as a part of this, the residential unit count that you could get on this, slightly under a half an acre, would be subject to density bonus provisions and things if you had certain units that met certain financial tests for low-income housing. But I presume the unit count that you could get on there would be far less than the total of the hotel and the residential units that are part of this. Is that roughly a fair assumption?
The calculations that I provided do not include fractional density, which I didn't apply because it wasn't needed and it made the math kind of complicated and hard to explain. So you can do 6 full-sized units, but you could do 12 600 square feet or smaller one-bedroom units, which is, you know, I think the hotel units are slightly larger than 600 square feet, but all of the residential units are under. So using fractional density, you might not get all the way to 24 total, you know, hotel plus residential being 24. You might not quite get that large, but actually 12, you'd have to do more affordable units, and now I'm getting into the complicated math I was trying to avoid.
I recognize that gets complicated.
Yeah.
Okay, here's an easy one. You identified that the commission can consider whether any additional conditions are needed for the wine tasting. Were there any additional conditions across the street at Market Walk for wine tasting?
There certainly are some conditions. I did not, you know, open up that project and read through them. I don't know, Warren, if you remember any specific, you know, those uses are all, you know, completely Spring Street facing. There's commercial uses surrounding it. I don't know the conditions of the Market Walk.
Okay. And then just a quick comment. I assume we're going to hear from the applicant in some form of presentation or Q&A. And I think an explanation of what they perceive the parking and parking management, how that's all going to work, would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Davis.
Katie, I had a similar question. I maybe read into Commissioner Connolly's question. It's a process question. Should we debate if this is where we want to see an overlay, if this is where we want to see hotel rooms? Shouldn't that precede debating an application? Seems like the applicant, it's like the cart before the horse. That's something that I kind of wanted to bring, you know, your thoughts on that.
I'm going to defer to Warren.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a interesting observation, because you do have a kind of a combination where you've got the existing use and the density bonus, which are, you know, almost by right type of uses that we have to grant. And then you have the hotel request, which is a legislative request, which is fully optional. It has to go to city council. So the combination of the two together have made the analysis of this project a little convoluted. We spent a lot of time with the city attorney working through all of that. In the end, you need all of them to process the project. They're entitled to ask for this project. This is the project they've requested. This is the analysis that you have to apply to it.
Okay, as a follow-up, it appears then the assumption is that we would have this hotel overlay, thus we're using the hotel parking formula. I'm just trying to think about the other uses, the wine tasting, et cetera, and maybe the impacts. I'm trying to calculate the impacts on the residential community. And so is there anything, is the non-residential, what I see up there, what we're calling 8 spaces for wine tasting or Where does the other mixed-use parking come in to this formula?
The 8 spaces you identified there, the non-residential, are going back to the site plan, those blue areas, the commercial, the language I used to confuse Commissioner Connolly, the commercial tenant spaces. So the area shown in blue, those 8 spaces are in order to satisfy the parking requirement for those 2 spaces, the blue.
The tenant spaces,
the
which could be the wine tasting.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, right now we have people parking on that vacant lot. I'm just trying to figure out impact to the community. So I'll look for the applicant to maybe talk about that. Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioners have questions of staff? I have a couple then. Katie, just kind of clarification. Some of them were already answered. I too had a question in regards to the overlay, in regards to the project submission. So I appreciate, Warren, your comments on that. I just wanted to get a clarification in the notes here. We talk about, there's a section here on page 8 that I was going over. The applicant requesting the 33% density bonus for 2 units, and then down below we have 1 and 2, which the height exception to exceed 36 feet, and then we have the parking reduction, 5 address of deficit requirements. And then we talk about granting the height concession and the parking concession as required by state law. But that's assuming that we approve the hotel overlay. Is that correct?
So the hotel overlay is a separate consideration, but the residential units, just looking at them on their own, it does allow them with the quantities they've provided,
Sure.
It gives them a 50% residential density bonus and up to 3 concessions. They've requested 2, one for the parking and one for height. So the hotel is kind of a separate consideration, and then you've got the residential and all the other components.
Okay, thank you. So essentially, if this was being proposed as a resident mixed-use development, then that's why we're mentioning that it's required by state law, and those would be the concessions that we would be considering.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that clarification. One other question. I noted something here. Let me go to my note. So we were talking about, I think it was the zoning. In there was something to mention in regards to C2 in the residential. I'm trying to find it in my notes, and I got to be honest with you, I'm using this tablet, which is fairly new. Here it is. It's on page 10. I was just a little confused by the comment. I think what it said was from page 9 to 10, establishment wine tasting room and unit, C2. Okay, I'm mistaken. That's the label we put on that was C2, right?
So I believe what is referenced there is the TC2, the Town Center 2 zoning district. So currently hotels are not allowed in the T3F. So when I go to calculate how much parking is required, there's really just a non-residential and a residential parking requirement. Okay. And so it's more fair to look at the TC2 zoning district where hotels are allowed and see what the hotel parking requirements are. There's some language in the staff report that kind of gives 2 different ways to calculate parking. The first is pretty outscaled and not really in proportion to what we would expect to see in our downtown for parking. I mean, 45 spaces would cover this entire lot. So staff is recommending we use the hotel parking requirement, which is what you see in the table that we saw earlier.
Okay, thank you, Katie. I'm sure I'm going to have more questions, but now that we've had some time to discuss, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Commissioner Davis, please.
Thank you so much for letting me come back in. Katie, because of potential effects on neighborhood circulation, parking, noise, et cetera, could you just explain the kind of noticing and the extent of noticing to the community and surrounding businesses, residents, et cetera?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
How you noticed this project.
Sure. The noticing was a bit confusing because the project got continued so many times, but it was put into the newspaper, and then it also, a postcard was mailed to all the residents within 300 feet before the hearing. It will also go to council, so this isn't the last time it'll be heard, and they'll get a postcard again for the council hearing.
So they know it's being heard tonight then?
it's unfortunate it was continued so many
it's
times.
confusing.
Because,
Yeah, I got it. Thank you
but they
so
did
much.
get a postcard some time ago.
Thank you.
Commissioner Colley?
Yes, Commissioner Christensen, you raised a question that I didn't think about, and that was with regard to the zoning change and the entitlement to have the density bonus. And if they were, and those are two separate things. If the, for some reason, the Planning Commission would not go forward with the zoning change, that would be a major impact to the development with regard to 16 hotel rooms. So that would change your whole parking calculation as well. So how does the zoning change to lodging affect the housing component of this? And if we're to look at, if one is required and the other is optional, how would one, with regard to the zoning change, how would that impact the project if they're not allowed the zoning change?
So I think we haven't done the formal analysis, but my guess is if the zone change wasn't to be approved, this project as it's currently configured, if all the hotel rooms were just designated as residential apartments instead, you could get they could demand the project be approved that way, build the project, and then come back and ask for the zone change at a separate time. So I think you kind of have to think about that when you're, trying to separate. If you separated out the zone change, the project probably would stand exactly as it's proposed, just with slightly different uses.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if the applicant would like to add to the presentation or answer questions, it'd be a great time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Christensen, members of the Commission. I'm George Garcia with Garcia Architecture and Design. I'm here with Michael Shermick representing the Tobin James family. Thank you for your diligence tonight. This is a very complicated project. Your questions are, quite frankly, spot on. So I'm trying to answer a few of them now. I'm going to have a brief presentation, most of which will kind of piggyback what Katie already did, but hopefully getting into some more fine detail. And at the end, if you guys have more questions, I'm more than happy to answer. We've been at this for almost 3 years now. Various iterations, we've gone to the DRC twice. So this project has been very considered, very vetted through staff and the ownership as to what type of project would not only be best for the landowner, but be best for the city. So it's, again, very complex project. There are a lot of moving parts, but I'll try and go through and as best I can explain the process of how we got here, and then again, answer any questions you might have. First few things I've heard in terms of parking, it's funny, I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and it always comes down to parking. Doesn't matter what the project is, residential, shopping center, it really comes down to parking, especially here in California. So I think the one comment, I can't remember who had about the concern about, we'll call time shift, parking, mixed use, shared parking. The designation, even though it's not in the staff report, but the basically working model is that all parking is shared on a first come, first served basis. Again, I've done dozens of these mixed use projects. It never works when you try to assign spaces. I myself own a mixed use building that I designed in San Luis Obispo. We still operate it. We manage it. I constantly get requests to have parking assigned. It will not work because of the offset. I think Commissioner Covarrubias said it works great when you have commercial office type use, an 8 to 5 type commercial. Those folks are there during the day. The residential folks leave and go to work. Okay, that shifts, right? When the 5 o'clock people go home from the offices or the restaurants, or in this case, the wine tasting, they'll shut down about at 5. The residential folks come back. So that's how the mixed use shared parking works. And again, only if it's a first come, first served basis. The other benefit we have here, I think it was brought up as well, and we support the recommendation to turn the parking along 18th to diagonal. I think you heard the city engineer say we're going to pick up about 3 or 4 extra spaces. We're in full support of that. I know the vacant lot right now is being used quite frankly, without permission as overflow parking for a lot of the residential and commercial users out there. So we are sensitive to that. We want to provide as much parking as feasible on this site as well as off-site. So we're happy to do that as a condition. So I think that's about it. Let me get into the presentation again. I'll go through some similar slides, and at the end, if you guys have any questions, we will be happy to answer them. As staff mentioned, it's a half-acre site, former Chevron gas station, which has been remediated. We have our closure letter from the State Water Board, so we're good to go on redevelopment. The project, again, consists of about 3,300 square feet of commercial. There's going to be 2 commercial lease spaces. One of them will be the wine tasting room. It's a bit premature on the other one, but there's discussions about a coffee shop or some other complementary use that will serve not just the project itself, but the residences and other users in the neighborhood. 8 residential 1-bedroom units. In early discussions with the family, we wanted to put as many units as we could. We were limited by the density, so that's when we started looking into an affordable housing component. One of the goals early on that Tobin had for the project is he wanted to provide worker housing. Okay, housing in general, as we all know, is a hot commodity in California, but worker housing, whether it's deed restricted or in this case by design, what we came up with was basically to provide both. The units are affordable by design. They're 1 bedroom, around 600 square feet each, actually 598 square feet. And they will, we have a section of them that will be deed restricted. So we'll have market rate and affordable rate units all cohabitating in the same project. That was a real goal of the owner to do this. And again, because we wanted to put more units in, but again, it's back down to parking, we had to figure out another way to monetize the site and create revenue. So we came up with a concept of a small boutique hotel that would complement the Tobin James brand. We came up with 16 rooms because, again, we didn't want to oversaturate the project, oversaturate the site, and again, back to parking. So that also, in addition to that, we also, as mentioned before, we want a project that's good for the community. And as you know, hotel rooms generate TOT, which is good for the city. So we wanted the project to be a win-win on design, location, economics, for not just the ownership, but for the city as well. So that's how we came up with the kind of the mix of the 8 residential units and 16 hotel rooms, as well as the on-site amenities that were mentioned. With the residential and the affordable housing, as staff detailed, we are pursuing a level of affordability that will give us the option to request 3 incentives from the city. We're actually only requesting 2, as previously mentioned, the parking reduction and the slight height adjustment, so we can squeeze the entire project into this volume here. In general, the strategy that we chose is set up on the screen. It will allow the ownership to bring much needed small scale, affordable and market rate housing to the downtown area, while enabling the applicant to expand his winery brand with hospitality offering in the downtown, which is not just a hotel, but it's also going to be a branded downtown hotel tasting room. For those of you who are familiar with Tobin James brand, it's out on 46 East. A lot of wineries now are coming into town. I think Austin Hope just opened a small winery, tasting room rather, so looking again to bring that brand into the downtown for everyone's benefit as well. Some of the design decisions we did, again, as was discussed about, the zoning and the small scale versus the uptown specific in the T3F zone. We went with a design element or design direction that reflects the flex shed vocabulary or architecture, if you would. A lot of those materials that we looked at, Katie mentioned the metal cladding, smooth cement, stucco, trying to use as much natural materials. You notice on the renderings the wood storefronts and whatnot, as well as some industrial detailing to sort of mesh some traditional components with some modern components. Katie went through this pretty well, but again, contextual analysis, something we always do from Architecture Design 101. We kind of look around the context, all the neighboring uses and the architecture of the buildings. There's kind of a mishmash of different styles surrounding the property, as well as to the back to the alley or across Spring Street. Again, it's stucco, colored stucco, metal roofs, it's kind of a potpourri of architectural materials. And then, of course, the Paso Walk, we looked at that. That's probably the newest project, the newest neighbor. They're a little more contemporary, so we're kind of leaned into that aesthetic with some of the colors and the branding. And again, here's our material board that reflects our interpretation of the architecture of the neighborhood, if you would. So getting into the project plans, I'll go through these quickly. As Katie already mentioned, overall site plan really centered around a courtyard. That courtyard will be private, and we're okay with the conditions to have that be used by only the residents, as well as the hotel users. That is the intent. Going into the floor plans now, again, commercial facing Spring Street. We wanted to make sure that we were sensitive to the Christian Center across the alley, as well as the other lower intensity uses. And you can see the courtyard there in the middle. And the front was broken up. Again, this is our kind of our second design approach after going to DRC with a much more massive building. We wanted to break this up. So really what you'll see from Spring Street is the appearance of two separate buildings as opposed to one long building. And that was deliberate to try and be a little more sensitive to scale and massing along Spring Street. And as you go up, again, Katie mentioned the residential is really towards the alley, towards the west and the south, having the hotel component above the commercial facing Spring Street primarily. Here's the third floor. You can see on the west or the left side of this slide, the residential goes away. There's only 2 stories of residential, again, because across the alley, we basically have 1- and 2-story buildings. So we wanted to be sensitive to that, keeping the mass up along Spring Street. And then, of course, the rooftop deck, which we're only actually utilizing one of the rooftop areas up there. Again, to kind of create a more bespoke, almost exclusive experience for the 16 rooms. This is not a big hotel. It's intended to behave more like, I think it's the Cheval, more exclusive, very high-end, small number of rooms, that kind of thing. Again, Katie mentioned the elevation. The building height is one of the requests that we're asking for. 36 feet is allowed. We're actually asking for, I think it's 39 feet. Most of that is going to be a equipment screen, quite frankly, as well as the barrier needed so folks will not fall off the roof terrace, which is important. Here's a section, I don't think that was shown before. So on the right is Spring Street. So again, we're kind of highlighting the fact that we're going to put the bulk of the building towards Spring Street on the commercial side where it belongs, and then taper the building down in height as you move towards the alley and towards the west. And then a few project renderings. Katie already showed these. Again, this is from the primary intersection of 18th and Spring. Looking back, you'll notice the wood storefronts along the bottom. Clear glass, we agree with that condition. We want people to see in as well as out. And then the hotel units above, the second, third floor. This is a view from, if you were at Paso Walk, looking across 18th Street, and hopefully, if approved, we'll have diagonal parking right along this area here. Again, view from the alleyway, looking to the northeast. And then back Spring Street in front of the funeral home, looking towards the northwest at the project. We do have some interior elevations just to kind of give you a taste of where the quality and the level of design that we want to go with this. These are conceptual renderings of the tasting room. The taxiderming horse is still under debate, whether it will make it or be legal. But again, this is sort of the feel that we want for the project. Very high level. Tobin is very interested in investing in this property that he's owned for a number of years and giving back to Paso. So again, we kind of came out with a bunch of different schemes for the interior of what the tasting room might look like. Very welcoming, again, very exclusive, very comfortable. Yeah, just another view of a fairly small tasting room. I think it's one of the smaller ones that will be downtown. Again, not looking to overpopulate the site. We get it. We understand parking is going to be an issue, so we don't want that to be an ongoing management issue for the site. And then we looked at the hotel rooms again, just to give an idea of the finishes. Again, looking for something very custom, very bespoke, very upscale, but also would reflect the brand as well. And that's it for my visual presentation. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm hoping that we can work through this. A lot of moving parts, but we're really hoping to move this on to the Planning Commission. I think one of the other concerns I heard was about the zoning change. For me, it helps me to think about it that we're actually not changing the zoning. The zoning will stay the same. It's simply an overlay to allow hospitality. All right. So, and we work with staff again, a couple of years on how to best prepare that. Should it be an incentive? Should it be a overlay? Should it be a complete zone change? And I think what we've come up with in terms of our entitlement strategy is the best of both worlds. I think it's defensible, it's supportable. Again, the hotel will allow the project to provide TOT back to the city, which is very important. So anyway, with that, I'll climb up and answer any questions you guys might have.
Great, thank you. Commissioners have any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Covarrubias.
All right, just so I can get it right in my head here.
Yep.
On page 7 of our report, it says the parking requirement is 1 parking space per hotel room, 1 parking space for each staff member on the largest shift, and 1 parking space per 1,200 square feet of hotel accessory uses open to the public. My question is 2 parts. The wine tasting portion and the hotel lobby are going to be 1 space? That's what I just saw in your rendering.
Correct.
So that's 1 space. Is that part of, or does that take up any of the 2 commercial units that were discussed also earlier? Are they separate?
So it is one of the 2 commercial spaces.
It is
of the property.
Okay,
correct. So it would be parked by the 1 to 400.
Okay, so when I look at the blue spaces,
yep,
that are in the picture, when we looked at that blue boxes,
can you go back to that, Kate?
Okay.
3 slides back.
Right there.
Yep.
So to the south or to the north, if you're looking at that, is it the bottom portion or the northern portion that's going to be the hotel/wine tasting?
It's the bottom portion.
Okay.
Yeah.
The use of the northern side of that, has that been identified yet?
To be determined. I think the ownership is in discussion with, again, a coffee vendor, retail, some, again, commercial, typical 8 to 5 type user.
Type of user.
Yes.
So I guess my question to staff is, again, just thinking about parking, if the use hasn't been identified yet, regardless of the use, it sounds like there's nothing that's designated specifically with regards to parking?
No, the 2 blue spaces, the 2 commercial tenant spaces are fully parked at 1 per 400 spaces. If we were looking at the table or on page 7, the 1 space per 400 square feet of non-residential space, those 8 spaces are to account for these 2 blue
For
areas.
the 2 blue spots?
That's correct.
Okay. So when I read the 1 space per 1,200 of hotel amenities open to the public, that's different.
We originally, you had talked to George about, is this courtyard looks like a great place where people who went and got coffee might want to go sit in the courtyard. If the courtyard was going to be available to sort of the general public, it would need to be parked at that 1 per 1,200. The conditions and the applicant's intent is not to open those up to the general public. So they do not have to provide parking spaces for those areas.
Well said. Thank you. Okay.
Commissioner Conley?
Just to clarify, I guess your wine tasting, is that the larger of the 2 commercial units or the smaller one?
Put that back.
The blue area, the blue.
It's
yeah.
the smaller, the one on the bottom.
So you don't have a tenant yet or a use for the larger one at this time?
No.
So with regard to wine tasting in the courtyard, and I think you guys have indicated that there won't be any use of the courtyard by the wine tasting facility. Is it so that the people in the wine tasting part of this project would have to stay within that commercial unit, or?
That is correct.
Okay,
yep.
Great. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Davis.
Yeah, I just have a question. With the residential units, is the intent to stay long-term rentals? We have a need for housing, or is there the possibility of them converting to short-term rentals, more tourist-related?
No, and mainly because the staff can comment there is some prohibition, but I think the lottery is up. There are no more spaces available for short-term rental. That's one of the reasons that we wanted to designate a chunk of these units as permanent long-term housing, and then the rest as true bona fide hotel rooms, again, for a lot of reasons, operational-wise, but again, the TOT benefit to the city.
And can I ask one other question? The project, the Market Walk, had some tandem parking. Was that ever a discussion or workable in your site plan? And we went round and round with that too.
Yeah.
But I was curious to get more spaces if you explored that.
We did explore it. Again, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, parking. We did have a scheme that had some parallel, or rather tandem parking spaces. My experience with those is they work great on paper. Academically, they're fantastic. It's much like the parking lifts. Again, they help you to get your numbers, but from a day-to-day basis, if you're living there or you're a resident or you're trying to go grab a coffee and somebody parks behind you, it's very difficult to manage. So we came up with this final scheme here as a way to basically mitigate any other conflicts, other parking conflicts that may occur with tandem, or rather, tandem parking. It's just, again, we've tried it. It's
Sorry,
just,
I had to ask.
I know. It's difficult to manage.
Yeah, parking is an issue. Thank you.
Commissioner Kogler.
I can't let this go without a little bit more parking discussion. So you build this as a premium lodging experience, and we've seen others in the community, most of which have valet parking now. Is that a consideration here at all? And if so, what spaces would be allocated to that use? And is it really such that if it's a free-for-all, first-come, first-served, you would have hotel guests in this premium experience who would have to find parking somewhere in the neighborhood?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, in working with Tobin and the family about knowing that we could get a parking reduction, either through mixed-use reduction or the affordable housing, what would be an appropriate amount of parking spaces? And we did a scenario where we actually were able to reduce parking even further units. And in speaking with Tobin, he's like, I need to have a parking number that feels right. Okay, even though we can get there academically or on paper, the project needs to have enough physical spaces that, again, for the majority of folks can come, they're going to find a space. So we run some analogies of the worst case scenario on a holiday weekend, right, when the hotel is going to be 100% occupied, full occupancy. Those occur rarely throughout the year. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, you're probably running 50, 60% occupancy. So instead of needing 16 spaces, you're going to have 7 or 8, okay? So we feel the amount of parking that we're actually physically providing, in addition to the offsite. Just anecdotally, I had a meeting yesterday in Visalia. I stayed at a very nice downtown boutique hotel, had to park on the street because it was downtown. That's, I don't want to say the price you pay, but it's convenient. There was a coffee shop across the street I was able to get to before the meeting, but I parked on the street. It's kind of one of those trade-offs. One other thing I want to say about parking, hopefully will assuage more concerns. Somebody mentioned about, everyone's going to have 2 cars for the residential, which I get it. It's California. We love our cars. I own 2 cars. I understand that. But the intent of these units, again, as Katie mentioned, 1 bedroom, less than 600 square feet. The intent is that they're workforce housing. Okay, so the idea of one person living there or a couple having just 1 car, that's the intent. Right, that's the user that we're looking for. We're not looking for a family of 5 that has 2 cars and a truck, and one's not working, and it's hogging up space. That's not the intent. The intent is to truly find tenants that understand living downtown. You're going to have some amenities, but you're going to have to give up certain things like that second car. But we're also providing plenty of bike parking and other amenities. There's a bus stop right out front. So this is truly an urban project that is intended to meet that certain specific use.
One more just came to mind. It maybe is unconventional, and I'm not saying it's good, bad, or but if you experienced this before, you interestingly on second and third floor have a mix of apartment rental units and hotels that are sharing the same corridors and the same movement patterns.
Yep.
Is that good, bad, or indifferent?
So it's a good point. It's good from a constructability standpoint, right? We're sharing elevator, we're sharing stairs, we're sharing egress. So from a constructability standpoint, it keeps our costs down. And as we know, housing costs rise for a number of reasons, but one of the major ones is construction costs. So if we're able to double up and prorate, for example, the hallways to both the hotel and the residential, then we can actually build cheaper product, or less expensive product. Sorry, it's not going to be cheap. The other thing is more of a getting into social engineering. Again, I've done many of these projects, and you'll notice that not only are the residential units and hotel units mixed hallways, but the affordable unit as well will be in that mix as well. So again, it's a matter of whatever economic status you're in, whether you're staying in a nice hotel room or you're getting up in the morning and going to work, as a teacher or firefighter, or you're a farm worker and you happen to be able to afford the residential affordable unit, we're all living in the same community, right? Architecture, in my opinion, should reflect that. There should be no barriers. There should be no, well, the affordable units seem to be over on that side and the nicer units on this side. I don't subscribe to that. Neither does Tobin. So by design, it's integrated so that you can walk by a door and not really know what the rent they're paying, right? And it really doesn't matter. And it's no one's business. So that's the intent.
Any other questions for the applicant from commissioners? I have a couple. I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Conley, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Cubillo kind of sparked a new question for me, and that is there's an area that's outdoor parking, and most of the other area is indoor parking. And you mentioned that it would be first come, first served. So my question is, how would that work with some of the parking places? Seem to be more appropriate for the hotels or the hotel guests or the apartment guests, maybe the covered ones versus the outside parking spaces.
I would agree that it seems more appropriate, but again, from a management standpoint, there's just simply no way to earmark the covered spaces for hotel users or to designate or reserve them. It just will not work, because what will happen is those spaces will get filled up, and if they're all filled up, then folks are going to start parking on the street. If it says hotel only and a residential tenant pulls in after work and says, I can't park there, he's going to park on the street. Okay, so that's what we're trying to avoid, is the concern about spillage into the neighborhood. And the best defense we have against that is parking is first come, first serve. And to that effect, we'd probably recommend putting in signs, not saying reserved for blah, 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 saying these are reserved for this project, yet to be named, only. You can park wherever you like. If you're a resident, if you're staying at the hotel, if you're coming for wine tasting, whatever open spot is available, covered or not, it's yours. Okay. So again, that's really the best defense we have to make sure that all the people use all the parking, that we fill up all the spaces first before there's any spillage onto the street.
Thank you.
Commissioner Covarrubias.
I just thought of something. Directly in front of the project on Spring Street,
yes,
there's not going to be any restriping of like temporary 20-minute only kind of thing, right?
No,
most hotels have a spot where you pull up, you can go in, check in, park there temporary, for 10, 15 minutes while you check in. There's nothing going to be like that in front of this, right?
No, keep in mind, we have 16 rooms. It's not a Marriott. We're not a 100-key hotel where you would need like a drop-off or a valet or, the guy out there with the cart. 16 rooms, very, very small boutique hotel.
Okay.
The intent is that right now there is parallel parking on Spring Street, and we just want to simply keep that. So if a spot's open, great. If not, they can pull around to the back and unload. And again, we're talking about 16 rooms, very, very small usage. And that's at 100% occupancy. As I mentioned, most of the time, we're probably going to be around 50, 60%. So we're talking 7 to 8 cars that may happen to arrive within the same hour or two. So.
And Commissioner Covarrubias, there is a bus stop in front of the site. So there is a stretch that is currently red stripe, but that's because of the bus, not because of this project.
I have a couple questions, just for some clarification, and I appreciate your time. I'm curious why, and I know we've kind of beat this up, and I know we're talking about parking, and you went to the fact that you guys think the argument is best to make it a free-for-all for parking, and why the residents would not have a priority since they're typically probably going to be home every day and would probably be nice to have a place to park, take your groceries in, be on site. Why was that not in consideration? Whereas a hotel person or a tasting room person is transient, and I understand that, it's boutique, but I would think as a resident, I would really want to know that I'm going to come home and have a place to park.
Yeah. I would say if this was a 100% residential project, I would agree. Then that's more something that you can manage. On a mixed-use project, which is what this is, in fact, it's a multi-mixed-use project. We have 3 uses, residential, commercial, and then the hotel, which is sort of a hybrid. The nature of a mixed-use project, as we discussed, is that the reduction allows for, accommodates the fact that the residential folks get up, they're gone by 8 to go to work. Okay, those spaces are free. If we designated those for a residential unit at this location, those spots would be unusable all day. That's wasted real estate, in my opinion. So that's the beauty of putting in zoning codes where you have mixed-use reduction or shared parking, those types of reductions, because of the fact they're offset. You have the residential folks who have, say in this case, 8 spaces. They're going to be empty all day, assuming those folks go out and they go to work and they do whatever they do. Those 8 spaces can be used by the wine tasting people or the other commercial space. That's sort of the offset. So we're trying to avoid having empty real estate sitting in your beautiful downtown. Again, that's the concept behind the mixed-use parking reduction, is that it's democratic. It's first come, first serve. Nobody is more special than the other person. Doesn't matter if you're paying $500 a night for a hotel room or if you're in the low-income unit. Doesn't matter. Nobody. Again, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares. You should be able to find a spot that's open, first come, first serve. That we found historically that's the best and, quite frankly, most democratic way to deal with shared parking. So,
to that point, historically, from what is there a location that you have experience from that, being that historically that's worked?
Yeah, many mixed-use projects. Again, I'll cite my own project in downtown San Luis Obispo. We've had it for 12 years. There's multi-use. We have restaurants down below, office, professional office on the 2nd floor, including my office. 3rd floor, we have 5 residential units. We have a parking lot in the back that has, I think, about 16, 17 spots. I don't know exactly. And my window looks out on the parking lot. All day long, people are coming and going to the restaurant, leaving. I see people come back because I'm an architect. I typically work late. So I see people come back to the residential. They pull in to spaces. Not once have I ever had a complaint in 12 years that, hey, I can't find a parking space. Maybe on a Saturday when it's, well, not even then, because when the restaurants are busy, the offices are closed, okay? So.
And that's downtown San Luis Obispo? Yeah. In downtown?
Downtown.
Okay.
Yes. So again, that's a real world example. We've done other projects for other owners. And again, I think it's supported by a lot of planning staff and agencies and cities that have adopted mixed use reductions, shared parking reductions, those types of things, because we know that they work.
Okay, so bear with me here. I think that's all the questions I have right at this moment. So unless anybody else has any questions, Commissioner Conley.
Chair, I just thought of a question with regard to this project being mixed use. You have some commercial use, you have residential use. Was there any consideration of parking for bicycles? I mean, you have a city that's that promotes alternate transportation, bicycles, and yet I don't see anything about bicycle parking here.
So if you look at the map, unfortunately, they're not designated. We actually have 10 bicycle spots on the site plan.
Okay.
And again, they're available. Same deal, first come, first serve. I agree. We want to encourage folks to use public transportation or alternate transportation, in this case, bicycles. You're right downtown. If you're living in a one-bedroom unit, there's no reason you should have 2 cars or even 1, depending on your age and mobility, right? So yes, we're providing 10 bicycle spaces on the site.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know that.
Good point.
Okay, so if we're done with questions for the applicant and staff, I'd like to move on to public comment right now. So if there's anybody who'd like to speak in regards to the project, please come forward, state your name.
Hi. All right, Linda George, 3126 Spring Street. Well, are there some red bells on this project? Okay, imagine, if you will, church, funeral, hotel, pass a walk all happening at the same time. You can presume that that's not going to happen very often in a year, but the reality is that, you know, as Norma would say, people are dying to get into the cemetery. So you have a mortuary, a preschool, and other various sundry businesses that require all that parking over a hotel. Now, if I remember the budget process correctly, this city only provided 1% housing for low income. My question is, conflicts between hotel residents and hotel stays. I don't think Chief Nor or the police have enough resources to be able to subdue those types of conflicts. This is the second project that you guys are looking at that is deficient in parking. I was just canvassing there, fast pack behind 18th Street, and I can tell you there is an insane amount of short-term rentals, Airbnbs downtown. So people are already complaining that they have 6 cars. You have then residential, and you're going to say, okay, well, if you're low income, you can only own 1 car. That is absolutely asinine. Ask of a citizen. This is too big for that corner, and I want to know if we got a grant for that from the state for that particular low-income housing, because if you're going to say it's workforce development, then I think that goes through the state of California. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So I think a coffee shop on top of that, next to Paso Walks, when they have live music there, imagine that. Now, I walk down those streets, and they are bad. I walked on them. Okay, so you're looking at not just 26 parking spots, you're looking, or whatever is required to push the project through, you're looking at up to 60 cars at any time during the day. I think it's ridiculous to ask somebody to leave for the day. I mean, you're not going to be promised, what happens if I get hurt, go on disability? I don't work for 6 months. My car's right there. Those are all possibilities. San Luis Obispo, I'm sure it works perfectly, but we are tiny. That corner is small. I'm telling you, I've been walking that whole corner, and those roads are bad up there. So you got preschool, mortuary, church on Sundays, every Sunday, and then you want wine tasting and a hotel. Please don't insult my intelligence and throw a potential workforce housing for a low-income person that must only own 1 car and be qualified. Because in order to be qualified for workforce income housing, that has to go through the state on grants. So I'm a little disturbed because this is in District 1. I don't know any of you. I know people are invested in this, but we need to think very carefully about putting that many more people in 1 corner. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Jeff Carr, Paso Robles. Thank you, Linda. That's some of the data I'd hoped to have received here tonight from the group about some of the external uses and the parking use. And so, yeah, I thought that was a fitting discussion because I'm concerned with everybody else about this parking. I would have thought that, you know, when they're asking for an overlay like this and putting this hotel in, when it went from 45 to 26, that we'd, you know, at least try to find the 26 spaces instead of throwing 5 more out there. I was confused about Warren. You're the one question that Warren answered about, well, what if the overlay doesn't happen? That it would just go in as is, and we're just using it as apartments. But I would assume that if the overlay doesn't happen, then the 26 parking spaces don't happen. It has to go back to the 45 parking spaces for the T3. That would be my assumption, and that would kind of blow this architecture out of the water. But I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. The other question I had, well, we go in from 6 to 9 by changing the striping out front, so I added three parking there. But in your presentation, you mentioned removing some alley spaces. I wasn't sure where exactly that was, or how many were those public spaces, and then, so you've removed some public spaces. It sounded like I didn't see that in the staff report, but we can get some clarification on that. I find it very interesting because this added some highlights to hotel, high-end, very high-end hotel, some nice photos, but apartments are affordable by design and low income. I mean, I wish when you showed the picture of the hotel room, I would have kind of liked to seen the picture of the apartment as well. I'm just kind of seeing that. It seems like an interesting mix, and I appreciate what they're trying to attempt with the social interaction. I mean, I think that's good, and the integration in the parking and the rooms and the shared hallways. I'm interested to see how that works. I mean, when you talk about the high end, I'm not sure how acceptable it might be to the person looking for a high end hotel. But I'm not in the hotel business, so. But that will be something interesting to see. I'm looking to see how that works out. And really the whole parking discussion, the whole parking issue, I'm not sure really works out. And I would have appreciated more of some of that modeling to see how those spaces filled up and how that overflow worked during some of these stress times, peak times, to give me more confidence that it wasn't going to be a real conflict on the neighborhood and the adjoining businesses. Thank you.
Michael Rivera, Jeff made some really good points. Hope you guys take that into consideration. My question is, and I think it was answered a little bit, how are people who are going to be affected by this project been contacted? And as you know, people are busy, they're working, they can't come to council meet, or they can't come to council meeting or planning commission meetings because they got kids, they're tired. How has that outreach worked, and how intensive? I mean, wake up, here it is, this is happening, and then suddenly the people go, what are they building there? That happens all the time. And then people wonder in city government, I wonder why people are so upset. Because you didn't make the right attempt to clarify and make it clear to everybody what's happening here. It's just like the Olive Street change of zoning. People were not happy at that meeting. They were ticked off. They said, I don't want this here. I don't want that change. And you see, that's been the problem with this city government for a while now. They just go ahead and barrel along and do their thing, and it's really created a lot of distrust and unhappiness. Now, I appreciate the gentleman's presentation. You did a good job. Very good. The staff did an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed listening and learning because it's important for us to get that information. I believe more information is better, especially when you're dealing with the people that are going to have the impacts that they're going to have in their neighborhood. Now, we're down 15%. I was just talking to a very, very well-respected hotelier here in this town. Big. He says they're 15% down. I don't know if that's globally or what. He says there's 100 new units coming in that are going to be available soon. We've got 1,000 planned in the pipeline. Rooms, 100 rooms coming online soon. We're $70 billion in debt in the state of California. In your calculus, you got to understand that we're going into a slowdown here. And in your calculus, we need to start looking at tapping the brakes. And you'll hear me say that more and more as this whole process goes forward. I'm talking about the election process. We need to start reevaluate where we're going and who and how Roblins are going to be affected by these giant, massive things. And affordable housing, if we can do affordable housing in a much more aggressive way, workforce housing, and find ways to park underneath the development and have that parking underneath the development, that might be an idea, and I don't know how much the state of California has that can help assist in subsidizing.
Thank you. Your time's up. Thank you, sir. We have two callers on the line. Who are we starting with, Marcy?
Jill, can you hear us?
Hi. Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead.
Please state your name.
Hi. Hi, this is Jill Alexander, General Manager of Paso Market Walk and the Lofts at the Market. And I speak on behalf of ownership, Debbie Mann of Paso Market Walk. I'm personally thrilled to see George Garcia's talent, knowledge, and experience behind Tobin's project on 18th and Spring. We want to express our full support for what Tobin James has planned for being a business leader in our community. Our hope is that this rezoning request overlay be granted and see that this project goes fully into motion. We are excited to be neighbors. Speaking from experience, we've had no parking issues according with our project. We're courteous neighbors, and we take into consideration all businesses and churches in our area. We believe we brought, a lot of jobs, TOT, and a lot of vitality to the city of Paso, beautification and things like that. So we're super excited to have this project move into motion across the street, be in partnership with Tobin James in the business and housing and residential and hotels. We just want to fully support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else? Another caller, Marcy?
Jan, can you hear us?
I can, thank you.
Go ahead.
All right. Good evening, commissioners. I'm afraid this is just a pylon, but
I'm sorry.
I cannot help
Please
it.
state your name.
Yes.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, Jan Albin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly I want to address the parking, but I want to address the project itself. One of the things I want to point out is that initially in the presentation, you stated that these are going to be market rate apartments with one being affordable unit. And then later, the gentleman stated the intent is to have these be one unit, because they're only 600 square feet, that these are intended to be a one-person workforce housing. So there's a huge difference between market rate and workforce housing, and I will point out that market rate housing on the 200-unit apartment complex on Creston, a one-bedroom unit in that complex is $2,500 a month. So if that's your intent, okay, you can get whatever you get, but to not have designated parking for apartment units, I think is just a serious mistake. And it's been pointed out. Can you imagine coming home from work, loads of groceries, and you're having to park down the street and around the corner to bring your groceries back home? I absolutely understand the problem with assigned parking, but that's got to be on the hotel itself. That's your issue. Whether you have, a gate up to for that people have a code access to get in, to park for the units or the hotel or whatever, that's being done at another hotel downtown, where everybody will have a code to get into that parking lot. But to not have assigned parking or available parking for 8 apartment units is just, in my opinion, a serious mistake. The other thing I want to point out is, or I want to ask about, is that you said there are 5 parking units that the deficit is a concession. Would somebody please explain to me how you get rid of 5, don't have to have 5 parking spaces because it's a concession? I don't understand what that means. It probably doesn't matter what it means. It's not right. You simply do not have enough parking for this hotel. You're going to have people parking all over the neighborhoods. And the Market Watch next door may not have a problem now, but they certainly could at some point. So I encourage you to take another real hard look at this project and about the lack of parking, and make them go back to the drawing board somehow, some way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments? Marcy, anybody else on the line?
No callers.
Okay, seeing none, bring it back to the commission for discussion. Would any commissioners like to bring up some discussion points? Comments? Commissioner Conley?
Just a clarification with regard to the parking, the one space per 400 square feet non-residential space. I'm assuming that those 8 spots are for the 2 commercial tenants. And I am, at first I thought maybe they were for the apartment units, because that would make sense. You have set 8 apartments and you'd have 8 designated parking spots for the apartment units. But it seems to me that if you need 8 for the commercial, you're still lacking 8 for the residential units. And so my understanding of that kind of was, I kind of took it the wrong way with regard to what those 8 spaces were. So I guess in my mind, we could be as short as 8 spaces for the residential units if they're not included. I see that it says mixed use shared parking, but you're talking about the residential units that will use the residential unit every day with one vehicle. So I'm just wondering how that was put into the calculation.
So, Mr. Chair, before we answer commission questions, do we want to respond to public questions that came in during comment?
Yes, I apologize. I was just reading my notes here and I realized we went over that. So I appreciate that, Warren. If you don't mind, Commissioner Conley. Okay, yeah. So I was just realizing I wrote down several questions, but feel free. I'm sorry to have skipped that.
So I'll go with my list and then you definitely
please,
fill
by all
in. No,
means.
but if I missed something on your list, please. So the first
Great,
question
thank you.
I heard was, what if the overlay doesn't happen? I did try to do a back of the envelope calculation. I think if hotel units were converted entirely into residential units, it is possible to get the density. Those hotel units would probably have to be reduced in size a bit, and an additional low-income unit would have to be dedicated. But largely the project could go forward as a purely commercial and residential project. As you know, it's not the applicant's intent, but with that ratio of low-income housing units dedicated, the state does require us to allow concessions, which could again result in a deficit of parking according to our local parking requirements. So it is possible for the project to proceed with some tweaks, but ultimately as far as density goes, it is possible to get additional residential density. I'm not sure that completely answers the question of what happens if they don't get the overlay, but it is possible to do a mixed-use project here with this number of units where people, sleep overnight, either transient occupancy or long-term occupancy, with some relatively minor tweaks to the scale of those units and a dedication of an additional unit. So that's one question I heard. The second was about public outreach. We really just did standard outreach. This has gone to the Development Review Committee, and so we did receive comments after that Development Review Committee meeting. We sent postcards to neighbors within 300 feet. As I stated, that was some time ago, but the residents will receive postcards before the Planning Commission meeting. We have not had any public outreach where we've had open houses or anything of that nature like we're doing for Olive Street. So it really just has been just standard public outreach at this time. But the social media for this project, did we put a media press release for this? Other than like the Planning Commission agenda has gone out, but we didn't do a specific press release at this time. We could certainly do that for the City Council at direction of Planning Commission. So we've just done standard public outreach for public projects. There were questions from an online caller regarding market rate versus workforce housing. I believe that the architect used the term affordable by design. That's a term that we bandy around in the planning and architecture worlds. Those units are market rate, but they're designed in a way that they are relatively small in size. They're not grandiose and large with, huge backyards and amazing views and all the things that you would expect when you pay a lot for a unit. These are 600 square foot, 1-bedroom units. They will be more than the deed restricted unit, which is a standard that's set by the state of California. So the state of California has law called Affordable Housing Density Law. And so applicants have the right to use state law if they deed restrict certain units to households that qualify for units, they are then granted concessions and affordable density bonuses. They do not receive grant funding from the state. This would be completely funded by the applicant, this project, but in exchange for deed restricting that unit, they are given concessions. They're given ways to make the building of this project more affordable, less expensive for the developer. The income, the limits of the income are set by the state. Well, who qualifies as a low-income a low-income household is set by the state and the county, but the applicant will receive no funding for this project. It's a density bonus project. The other 7 units, as the architect described, are intended for workforce. I don't think that is not using the legal description, what workforce housing means within the legal description of what is in the affordable housing density bonus law within the state. But the intent is that these units are relatively small and will be, by design, less expensive than renting a single family residence with 3 bedrooms and a big backyard and all the amenities you would expect in an expensive rental. I believe the online caller also had questions about concessions. This comes also from state law. This is the state density bonus law. If the applicant deed restricts units for 55 years to an affordable housing or an affordable household, they are allowed a certain number of concessions, and so they can make requests of the city, and if the city denies them, then we are breaking state law.
Okay. And just to follow up on that parking concession, I know that's been a big issue. We've spent a lot of time with the city attorney. Maybe we could have the city attorney just kind of explain why we have to grant that concession for the parking. So, Andrew, you want to weigh in really quick on that?
Sure, absolutely. I think in terms of why essentially there is a requirement that the city make written findings. I think Katie may have touched on it, and let me actually just pull up the statute itself just so I have that handy. But essentially, absent the city making these written findings that the concession can be denied, as a matter of state law, it's that essentially the city's hands are tied, that they have to grant that concession. My understanding is at the staff level that evidence could not be found that would support a denial findings, and that being the case, just again, as a matter of law, the city would essentially be required to accept that as a concession.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. I think there was one other question in regards to public parking spaces being removed. Was there something to that effect? I think, yes.
That is correct. So currently there is some angled parking adjacent to the church on 18th Street. And I don't know that I have a slide that will show it other than the vicinity map. So the church is to the west of the project, and there is some angled parking that gets very close to the alley. So the city's transportation engineer consultant had recommended that a parking space be removed right at very close to the alley because of sight distance. It creates a hazard.
Okay. I think that was the questions that I had written down as well. Okay, we'll bring it back to commission for discussion and comment.
So I think we had Commissioner Connolly's question, and I think it related to the parking calculation.
Yeah, just to put it in a nutshell, there are 8 residential units, yet there's no parking that it says 0 with mixed-use shared parking, and I would think that of all the uses, the residential need for parking would take a priority. So I'm just asking how that what consideration was made.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about parking in a different way when you think about our downtown. When you park a project for every single potential user that could ever come and use the uses on the site, what you end up with is Walmart. You end up with a store and a sea of parking. In our downtown, we want to see pedestrian uses. We want to see a much more intense use of the land that is not parking lots. Obviously, it does mean that there will be more cars parking on the street, but that is the intent. There are baked in parking concessions within the Uptown Town Center specific plan to address that and to already have relatively low parking standards. Shared parking is one of the ways that we do that, and I think the architect has described it well. The intent is that there are parking spaces that do have to be, they're shared. There is some management that has to occur with that because you've got people coming and going, but the intent is with shared parking, you get to double count those commercial spaces because at one time of day you'll have a residential user using the site, and at another time it'll be a commercial user. The type of person who's going to move into a project like this is going to be aware that they're moving into into an apartment that doesn't have a designated parking space for them. Is it inconvenient? Yes, but they made a decision to move there. So I think when we think about parking in downtown, we want to make sure there's some parking. We know cars are coming. It's not that we want zero parking. We need some, but we don't necessarily want to park for Christmas morning, where every possible person who can ever come to this site has a spot with their name on it so that they can, they can park there. So, with that in mind, the residential parking that's there on that table, that's allowed whether or not this is an affordable project. When they have a mixed use, it's allowed per the code, they are allowed to take a reduction in parking when they do mixed uses.
Okay, I think that answers the question, but I would think the priority would be on people that have a permanent need for a parking space, which would be a residential person and a residential unit and a family that has one car. So it just seems like maybe the standard and requirement could be a different mixture and come up with the same 21 with a deficit of 5. But it just seems to me that the residential units would need some assurance that they have a place to park their vehicle if they're part of a family and want a place to live and enjoy the convenience. So I understand the mixed use, but I think that maybe it could be you could say the hotel won't be full all the time, so the requirement may be less than 16, but maybe that's part of the city code that you require one per hotel. It's just, from my point of view, it seems like the vacancies for spaces would occur more in the hotel and the non-residential, but would be more of a need for the residential side of this. But maybe I'm talking about things that aren't allowed in your code for hotel, and so this is a way to get to that end anyway.
Sure, and Warren, maybe you want to jump in.
Yeah, so I think the architect made a good argument for the first come, first served model for parking. And the city attorney mentioned, why we have to grant the concession. With those points said, we do believe the commission under your CUP development plan has the discretion to require assigned parking for the residential. So if you felt strongly that you wanted spaces for that reserved or something, I think that's within your discretion to recommend that to Planning Commission or to City Council.
Commissioner Kogler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff, if you'd speculate with me again just a bit. So this project, the conditional use permit is for the wine tasting room, essentially. The development plan approval is for the development plan, and then the rezoning is for the hotel. So if we pare that down to some essential elements and say, this is going to be theoretically, this could be a residential project, which you've equated could be roughly this configuration in all likelihood. Would that be pretty much a by right approval?
They would still need the affordable housing density bonus for the concessions because the project is still too tall and does not have enough parking.
Yeah, ignoring a couple of those kind of things, it seems like you could massage this with the affordability factor and so forth, that you could pretty much achieve this building, this mass, this kind of approach on this corner. Trying to equate this back to, again, where I started my comments tonight with the desired building form, which maybe this is, or maybe, I think it's a really great looking project. I don't want to disparage the project. I think it's very well designed. And I guess as I reread it, it is desired. It's not required. And so you could see more mass on this than maybe what that sentence would immediately make me think about. My only other comment is I sympathize with my fellow commissioners and agree with the thrust on the parking for the residences. Coincidentally, you have 8 carport slots that are in consecutive row there. And I forget which direct compass point it is, which could serve 8 residential units. You could accomplish control of that. I realize it's easy to say and hard to do. Maybe it's too suburban, but garage doors. You could create garages where you've got those 8 units. I rent my apartment, I get my key, I get my opener, I've got my parking space. You don't have to worry about the hotel controlling it. So I think there's ways that you could do that, whether or not they fit in the motif of the architecture, or whether you find contemporary doors, for example, that complement the building, which you probably could. I would look to you guys to say, how can we really make sure that parking is available first and foremost for the residents that live? That's my thought.
Commissioner Kovarevis?
So we talk a lot about state requirement, right? Katie, is it a fact that sometimes our hands are, I understand, and I think Commissioner Kogler nailed it, where we can make some slight requests, modifications, but for the most part, because we've had other projects similar to this where we argue the parking, right? But sometimes our hands are tied because state does allow for discretions. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, the state requires concessions when deed restricted units are offered.
Right. And so the word that always sticks out to me is when we start using the word requires, right? So when the state requires something, it almost limits our ability, correct?
Correct.
To deny it based on the allowable requirement.
Yes, there are portions of this project that you would be ill-advised to recommend denial because of state law.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that.
Commissioner Neal.
As I sit here, I usually am in the minority on the parking requirements for the Uptown specific plan. I think I understand why it was done when the plan was introduced. I like the idea of a reduced parking. I do not want to see a sea of parking in front of our downtown. And so with that, we have to give up some of the parking requirements that we may see in other parts of town. And I commend the owner and the architect for bringing a project, which I very much like, to us that meets the parking requirements except for the concession. I understand the math. I get to how we get to the numbers. I would be reticent to suggest that we assign residential spaces, because then that would limit the number of spaces allowed for the retail. If per se, or it so happens that the residents are not home, then there's an empty spot, and then the retail is pushed out to the street. We have the reduction for a reason, and I think we should allow that parking to be assigned or not assigned, first come, first serve. So I like this project. I think it will be a wonderful addition if it passes to the corner, and that is all I have at the moment. Thank you.
Commissioner Davis?
You just read my mind. You just do it. Katie, is there any, have you ever heard of requiring management communications to the residents that there's no guarantee of a dedicated parking? Can we require that of an applicant?
You could certainly make it a condition of approval that they communicate that to their residences. Yes, residents. Yeah.
Okay. have a few comments and maybe some questions. And I understand Commissioner Neal's point in regards to the concessions, and I wouldn't disagree with that, primarily when it comes to the housing aspect. We so badly need housing. So I was happy to see that there were some residences in the project. I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around. I can appreciate how I think the applicant and staff came to this conclusion to try and make this project work by adding a hotel overlay. I'm not saying that's not something we wouldn't necessarily want to see there. I'm having a hard time with it because of the fact that we're doing that in ways that I think just so we can have that hotel aspect overlay, not taking into consideration the other aspects of it to its extent. Personally, I would have loved to seen more residential units there if they truly were something that was garnered for workforce. Because then I feel that you've got community, and if that spills over, parking spills over into the community, you've got community working together in the neighborhood, because it is a neighborhood that would be affected by that, in my opinion, in a strong sense. And I know we're going to adjust the parking on 18th Street. We're going to adjust, we're going to have parking on Spring. There's oftentimes I go to the Market Walk personally, my wife and I, because we don't want to go downtown and deal with, trying to find parking and things like that. So we're there for, a couple hours, and we'll park on Spring Street, but then we're gone. So for me, I'm having a real hard time. I feel like it's a little bit of a mishmash to just get to the one point, because we already know there's a parking deficit. And I feel like there's attempted justifications for it, which I'm not saying I wouldn't disagree with those points. We are not downtown San Luis Obispo, and I can appreciate historically how that does work down there. And there's a reason why in previous projects downtown, we have made it a point, I feel, a lot of times to deal with the parking or have the applicant dealing with the lost parking. Now, 5 spaces doesn't seem like a lot when you look at the numbers, and I can agree with that. But I think we all know in reality that that's actually probably more than that if you're going to take a unit and 2 people have a car. If you're married and you move into one of these workforce housing, which in our town, because of affordability, that is a large factor. It's very rarely that I see a lot of people living singly in one unit. A lot of times some of those units are filled up more than that. So for me, I think that a lot of the questions have been answered. Personally, I love the look of the project. I love the concept. I love where it's at. I really do. I have a lot of interest to improve that portion of town. I think it's a great concept. I almost feel like Commissioner Davis made a point earlier. We almost should have been discussing this extension of downtown, or as this overlay. We're empowered to approve or move this overlay on. But I'm kind of torn. I'm almost rather see it as either all a hotel or all residential. I feel like we're going to be, in my opinion, there's a mishmash that is going to come to loggerheads at some point. And I agree with Commissioner Kogler. I think there is a way to truly manage the residential parking for those residents. And I think if that means that hotel guests need to have more of a valet type parking or something like that along those lines, I think that would be fine. Again, I'm not in the hotel business model, so I don't know how that technically works, although in my mind, I'm just basing all these thoughts of my experiences. And like if I go to downtown San Luis Obispo and I want to visit the San Luis Hotel, I come in and pull in and they take my car and they go park either at one of the parking structures, which is very close distance walking wise, or one of the parking lots. We don't have that, and I get that. And we're growing, and maybe we will have that someday downtown. But I feel like the impact of the excess parking, and I know that other commissioners may not feel the same way, that's always been something that I look at as a community and as a neighborhood, and I feel, how would that church feel if Sunday, they've lost 5 more of their spaces, and now, my grandmother who came with me, I've only got 1 parking, and I've got to park down the street or drop her off. It does create a conflict, and I guess that's a city that's growing. Back to my point of the way we got here I understand it's actually very clever because then it allows us to use the parking. And I appreciate the calculations that Katie made on the back of the napkin, so to speak, to find out if this would be a project that could be moved forward as residential. And in my opinion, I like that concept even better. So I'm having a hard time struggling. I'm struggling with this of all these multiple uses. And I think the building looks great. I love the idea of the commercial downstairs like that. I think it's brilliant. I wish we had more of the aspect being mixed use, in my opinion. I'm not sure that we need more hotel rooms, in my opinion, as well, the many as we've seen come through, and also the drop in the STR uses around town. So that's kind of what I'm struggling with. I wanted to put it out there to my other commissioners that I'm really having a hard time with that, to come to terms with that for all the concepts of this project. Commissioner Covarrubias.
Katie, I got a question for you. On the 8-unit apartments, are they similar in design, do you know, of the hotel rooms?
The hotel units are slightly larger in general, but they are designed very similar to, the hotel units are very similar to a one-bedroom unit. Let's see.
Are they kind of designed like studio type?
You know, and now it looks like I had forgotten. It looks like the hotel units are more of a studio. I thought they had bedrooms. I'm
right.
Misspoken. Maybe the ones on the ground floor are.
I guess my question is, just for the sake of argument, let's say the project gets approved. Down the road, a year from now, hotel's not doing as well as we thought. We're not making money. We want to convert this entire project, all the rooms, to apartments. What's the process for? I mean, they'd obviously have to come back to us, because you're saying the project could be revamped a little bit as strictly all residential now and meet the parking, the allowable parking requirement. So my question is, assume it's approved, move forward, a year from now, the hotel's not doing well. A business person's going to go, what do we do? You know what? We're making whatever we're making on rentals. Why don't we just rent them long term? What does that look like?
So I think the biggest thing, they will be subject to an affordable housing agreement, and they will have to provide a specific percentage that gives them their density bonus and all of their approvals. So if they wanted to convert, it may be that they would have to deed restrict an additional unit. We'd have to look at all the numbers. They would have to keep at least 15% of the project affordable for a low-income household. So however many residential units, they'd have to have at least 15% of those.
Got it. Okay, so that's the hotel and the residential aspect. They could keep the commercial piece still, right? Since it's a mixed-use type scenario, right?
Right.
Okay. I'm thinking about it, and I think my fellow commissioners, and again, I agree. I think it's a good-looking building, great project. We run into this issue all the time with parking. It's a challenge. When I look at the alley, there's 8 units that are right there along the alley. If there was some way to allocate those 8 units strictly for residential, I get that it's hard to monitor, track it. I don't know if it's signage. Commissioner Kogler made a great point. Do you enclose it somehow, add a garage component to it, give somebody a clicker? I would assume as people are checking into the hotel aspect of it, somebody at the desk is going to say, hey, can't park in the back alleyway, use the ones on the side, right? Or you'll get towed, or whatever the case is. So, I like the project. If we were to keep this moving forward, my personal opinion is I think I would be in support of at least allocating those 8 units along the alley strictly to residential. How that's done, I guess we could leave that up to the applicant. But that's my initial thought.
Thank you.
Commissioner Neal.
Thank you, Chairperson. I had a question. If we were to assign those 8 residential units parking directly, how does that impact the Uptown Center plan allows for 66% of the commercial parking to be shared? All of a sudden, we've conditioned this project to be even in less conformance to the parking standards. So I'm not sure that we could, unless we gave a greater concession on parking, condition those spaces to be residential only.
I think the intent of the Uptown is that those spaces be shared. I don't know that it's explicit, and I don't have a condition that makes in the draft resolution that makes it explicit that they have to be shared. So I think it is a condition you could put on there. I think it has the potential to cause. Now in the daytime, there'll be parking spaces unavailable, and you could be causing actually a greater impact on the neighborhood as opposed to having impact on the residents who choose to live in this project. So I think that's something to consider as well. But I think it is possible to require the applicant to designate those spots. Not necessarily the intent of the Uptown, but it's not explicitly prohibited.
So I guess I'm not understanding then your parking count. If we have residential at 1-to-1, we have 8 units. That's 8 units of residential. If we are assigning them specifically to the residential, wouldn't we need to come up with another 8 parking spaces because of the non-residential use requirement?
So I would argue that the parking count, we have this calculation of how we get to the number. How those spaces are managed is not necessarily laid out in the plan, specific plan.
And if I may, just to that point, Commissioner Neal had a good point in that sense, or at least maybe I understood it this way. The actual hotel rooms, as the applicant pointed out, would probably be 50%, maybe 60 occupancy. So I could see that being a flexible type space that would work into that calculation just inadvertently by the fact of its use. Is there any more? Commissioner Conley.
Well, I kind of mentioned that I think the way the standards and requirements are laid out is just a pure analytical mathematical way of getting to a required versus proposal. And I think the project is a nice project. It's very good looking. But the reality is this is not how people are going to park. You're going to have the residents parking and taking up what they need when they can. And so, and because you have a different occupancy rate on the hotel, you won't need the 16 spaces. They'll be used by the apartments. So I think the project deserves good consideration. The parking calculations are, I guess, a necessary evil is how to come up with a total required versus proposed, but that the practical aspect of how they're used is not necessarily the way it's laid out here. And I think maybe we should, as a planning commission, we should consider that, is this is just the cards that are dealt, but they could be shuffled in different ways. There's still the same number of cards.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Davis?
I'm really torn on this project. I do think it's a nice project, and I'm concerned about impacts on parking. But on the flip side, I hear an applicant and has maybe a business model why he wants those hotel rooms. I'd prefer to see more. We have improved a lot of hotel rooms in this town. I prefer to see more residential. That's my personal preference. I don't know if there's any way we can assure some flexibility so that the applicant, if approved, could adjust as the market. I don't know. I don't know Toby's business model, but for some reason he wants the 16. I hear what you're saying. I tend to agree with you that if I was a resident in that studio, I'd want a dedicated parking spot. But I've lived in Paso Robles, and maybe that's the old Paso Robles way of thinking. Maybe a mixed-use resident would understand going in. It's, I'm going to have to fight for parking. That's why I was wondering if there was a way to have some kind of communication. So those are just my thoughts.
I think that, again, for me, I'm struggling with the the overlay. That's one thing we have to approve, let alone the CUP. And I totally understand the legal standards if we were to make this housing, what we would have to provide with for concessions. And to me, that, that seems like it's a very justifiable case. So I'm still struggling with that. But if anybody would like to make a motion or some other recommendations, Commissioner Kogler?
Just a quick comment. I came in with a similar mindset, Chair, that you have, that I was struggling with the hotel aspect of this. It seemed to me when I first opened the last of my paper packets, by the way, probably. But when I opened this and I could start marking it up and getting my thoughts down on paper, was that in the back of my head, it was that the hotel was driving building mass and was driving a more intensive project. And as we've gone through discussion tonight, I've come around to say, no, that's really not the case. Because I think you could put a residential unit in here that would meet probably the city's requirements that could look very similar to this and be as intense as this and probably even have a greater parking shortfall. And I guess I've come around from a use perspective to say that the hotel units, we get 8 housing units, which is great. We get 1 very affordable housing unit, which is really great, really, really great. And I'm not certainly trying to speak negatively of that, but I have a little trouble with the nexus between 1 unit and 3 concessions, but that's a state issue. I set that aside. I mean, that seems way out of balance to me, but so be it. So anyway, I've come around. I think I can support the hotel. I think that actually will be less intense in some ways because the units are at times 50 to 60% occupancy. It's kind of like me living closer than I'd like to be to a short-term rental unit. But, during the week, that's a great neighbor. The weekends, not quite so much. So, but that's the impact. So I think I've checked that box off myself, and I guess that's enough said. Thank you.
Chairperson Christensen, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, Commissioner Neal.
I'd like to move that we approve draft resolution PC 24CCA, recommending adoption of a mitigated negative declaration, state clearinghouse number 2024070401, based on finding and subject to mitigation measures.
And I'll second that.
One point, I had a question. Is there any modifications to it? It's just as it's?
This is just for the MND, the mitigated negative declaration.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And I'll second that.
We have a second with Commissioner Conley. We have roll call, please.
Commissioner Neal?
Aye.
Commissioner Conley?
Aye.
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Kogler?
Aye.
Commissioner Covarrubias?
Aye.
Chairperson Christensen?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0. That's Resolution A.
Chairperson Christensen, I'd like to make a motion, please.
Commissioner Neal.
I'd like to move approval of draft resolution PC 24XXXB, recommending approval of ordinance rezoning to property to include resort lodging overlay district based on findings.
I'll second.
Would Commissioner Neal, the motion is this resort lodging, would you consider mandating that, putting a requirement for the residences to have their own parking spaces?
I think that would fit better in the next resolution.
Okay, thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Neal?
Aye.
Commissioner Covarrubias?
Aye.
Commissioner Kogler?
Aye.
Commissioner Conley?
Aye.
Commissioner Davis?
Aye. Did we have a second on that? I just wanted to verify we had a second. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, aye.
Chairperson Christensen?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Chairperson Christensen, I'd like to make a motion, please.
Thank you, Commissioner Neal.
I'd like to move approval of draft resolution PC 24XXXC, recommending approval of the development plan, including concessions and the conditional use permit for the wine tasting room based on findings and subject to conditions of approval, with the added condition that future tenants be advised that parking is not guaranteed.
Oh, so that was for the residences not to have parking, guaranteed parking?
That
okay.
It was I added that the future tenants be advised that they do not have a guaranteed parking spot.
Thank you. Okay, discussion or a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Davis?
I'd like to ask for clarification. You're talking about the apartment units, not any of the other, like, hotel units.
The future apartment tenants.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Neal?
Aye.
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Connolly?
Aye.
Commissioner Kogler?
Aye.
Commissioner Covarrubias?
Aye.
Chairperson Christensen?
Nay.
Motion passes 5-1. These are all recommendations that will go on to council for final decision.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Move on to discussion items. Do we have any discussion items, Warren?
There are no discussion items.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have the consent calendar. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar? Or?
Chairperson Christensen, I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar, July 1st, 2024, DRC committee meeting minutes, the July 9th Planning Commission minutes, August 13th and August 27th Planning Commission meetings.
I'll second.
Second is Kogler. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Neal?
Aye.
Commissioner Kogler?
Aye.
Commissioner Covarrubias?
Aye.
Commissioner Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Connolly?
Aye.
Chairperson Christensen?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Moving on to other reports. Paso Robles Streetscape and Ad Hoc Committee report.
No report tonight.
Okay. Do we have anything for housing constraints?
Yeah, so the zoning code recommendations from the Planning Commission are going to be on the next council agenda, which is next Tuesday. So that will be the zoning code and all the additional consistency changes to the other municipal codes that have been recommended. So that will be on the next council agenda.
Thank you. Development Review Committee rotations. Do we have anybody that needs a change at this time? Commissioner Covarrubias.
Yeah, I might have a conflict on the 23rd. I'm actually due back in town. I'm just not sure if I'll make it back in town by 3:30. But worst case, I could always call in if I needed to. But if somebody's able to cover, I'm happy to switch.
So that's the 23rd?
23rd of September.
Commissioner Neal?
Thank you, sir.
Am I on?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No, it's Covarrubias, Christensen, and Conley.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I don't have a specific conflict right now, but I luck of the draw, get November, December, January. There may be one that comes up in there, but I'll keep you apprised.
It's heavy for me too.
Yeah, I think there's a few of us going to be in the same boat, so I appreciate that.
Happy holidays go to DRC.
Okay, so moving on to Planning Commissioners' comments. Do we have any commissioners that have any comments? Okay, seeing none,
I have a question. And
yes, Commissioner Davis.
I just want to compliment staff. That was tough, but Katie did a job.
Sure, it's fine.
It was complicated, and you really helped me get through the process. So kudos to you. And then a question. I think this was asked perhaps at a meeting when I wasn't present, but I want to know what's happening at the former Wells First Interstate Bank, Keller Williams. Is there a tenant moving in? There has been a promotional container on the corner for some time. Is there any momentum building to get that resolved?
Yeah, there's a new tenant that's working on improvements right now. So that's the corner of 13th and Spring Street, the old Keller Williams Realty. That's the new home of the Paso Robles Chamber of Commerce. So they're doing full improvements right now. They'll be redoing all the exterior, new landscaping, new signage, and then the Wine Country Alliance will be a co-tenant with them. So it's going to be a top-notch project, but it's all permitted. It's under construction. That's why you see the container on the corner.
And it should be moving soon, or we don't know the timeline?
It's all under construction right now, so they're moving as quickly as they can.
Okay.
They're doing full new interior
Okay, just
improvements.
curious.
There'll be a visitor center there, which will be really, top notch.
It's great on Spring Street. It's always been a kind of an issue, or is it visible on Park? So good job.
Commissioner Kogler.
But just to clarify, when the project is done, the city has the ability to say it's time to get the container out of there?
Yeah, the container's only allowed when the building permit's issued, so that's just part of the construction equipment that's on site.
Seems like it's been there a while, but sounds.
Okay. I can appreciate that, actually.
It's a chamber, I'm not going to say anything.
Any other commissioner? I wanted to make a comment. I wanted to say, staff, thank you. I know that was a very difficult one, and it's probably been going rounds and rounds. Again, I really wish there was more housing involved with it rather than hotel. But I got to be honest, Commissioner Kogler brought a point up, and I think it was concise, and I think it made some sense in reverse about the parking spilling over into the neighborhood. So I'm hoping that is less of an impact than, say, the additional housing there. So just wanted to put that out there, and thank you, everyone, for a tough night. So with that, do we have a motion to adjourn? Or we got staff comments. You guys have stuff to say.
Yeah, so iPads. So we're in the process of distributing iPads. Marcy's coordinating, getting them handed out. So if you haven't gotten one or have any questions, talk with Marcy. If you have any questions about how best to interface with it, that sort of thing, let us know, and we'll get that straightened out, and then we'll probably do some sort of training at one of the future meetings, just make sure everybody's understanding how best to take advantage of the digital format. Other things going on, a couple projects coming up. There's a multifamily project up on 12th Street that we've been working on for a while. It's been through DRC a couple times. We expect that to be on a future agenda fairly soon. There's also a fire training center facility at the Union Road City Public Works and Safety Center. So I think we've had some questions about that. That's scheduled for your next agenda as well. The Olson specific plan is moving quickly ahead with infrastructure improvement. So the new Sherwood Road alignment that connects to Lene Road is scheduled to start paving this Thursday, as well as Airport Road, Lene, and Fontana, which are all roads that are desperately in need of upgrades. If you've been out there, all the community buildings are under construction. Royal Oak Park is under construction. Turtle Creek Park's under construction. Planning Area 13, which is the courtyard housing, they've got rooftops up. That's going very quickly. So if you haven't been out there, it's changing very, very quickly. So that's very exciting. And then let's see, Beechwood specific plan. So that's the other specific plan that was approved by the commission and council. One of the facilities that's required there is the 8-acre community park. So the developer is working on the first phase tentative maps. They have those pretty much ready to go. They're still looking for a merchant builder to come buy that first phase. As soon as they complete that deal, I think that's going to move toward construction, which means then the park needs to be built. So we've been working with them on the design of the park. There was a concept for the park, which is sports fields and a playground. They've been working with the Parks and Rec Department to refine that design. That refined design went to the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee yesterday. They've been able to add an additional baseball field to the design now. They've got a refined program for the whole site with all the details for construction. So based on that, we'll be able to now move forward with actually programming and construction documents for that. So that park we know is very much needed right now. for the community. So that, is moving forward. So that'll go to the city council next for authorization to design the final, construction plans, that sort of thing. And then timing of it will be subject to how quickly that first builder comes out of the ground. So that's, I think, staff's report tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to take that opportunity away from you. Just tired. Okay, if that's all, do we have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Everybody in favor, say aye. Aye, thank you.